That certainly didn't come out the way it was supposed to. I am not happy with this at all. Too gappy. So I've got a plan B, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. So this is my basic sandwich. I have maple, mahogany, maple, mahogany, maple. And my maple sections are at least one saw curve thicker or wider than is the mahogany. This will allow me to make a rip down the center once I have everything glued up. So this simulates the maple, mahogany, maple, mahogany, maple. And if I cut that into pieces so that my mahogany ends up in a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square, like so, when I go to do the glue up, I'll just tip these at an angle and glue them up so that I create this diamond pattern with the mahogany. And actually what I'm creating is 2 sets at one time. Waste a little bit in that I'm going to have some diamonds left on the outside, but I know I'm not going to have any gaps and everything should line up just perfectly. My triangles are all going to be the same size because it's made out of 1 thickness of board. So I'm going to end up with 2 bars that look like this without the gaps. Now I've planed everything down so that my outside boards are identical in thickness. The center board is actually a little bit narrower, but that's okay because I'm cutting away the waste in the center, and I shouldn't have, I'm not worried about the triangles on the outside that I can again use for another project. So here we go. Yes, this board is narrower than the others. It's okay because it's still wide enough for me to get 2 sets of my thickness of 3/8 of an inch for the pizza peel. And this one's a little bit thicker. I'll just cut off the excess. Now I need to cut my stock into parts. I'm going to begin by squaring up this end. I have just a sacrificial piece here clamped sort of in place that can move around, that's okay. So I'll line this up on my cutting line and cut the end off square, followed by getting the thickness. So this piece of stock is some that I milled to the same thickness as the other mahogany pieces. I'll use that to set my stop so that all the mahogany parts will come out square. See where the blade cuts on the bandsaw sled, so I can just line this piece up with that cut and then bring my stop up to that point. I'll make sure that'll make sure everything is completely lined up and it should be square. With the stop at its current setting, this would be the way the squares come in line. It looks to me like it's just spot on, just enough room for a little light sanding. And that's about it. That's all I want, just enough to take off these rough edges. So that's good. I'm going to go with that and proceed to cut up lots of these little pieces. Now that I have all my pieces cut out, I need to clean up these rough edges left by the bandsaw blade. And that's just so I get a good gluing line. I don't want anything to interfere with clamping things together. I'll just take some, this is 320 grit sandpaper, and take off those little rough edges. One of the advantages to this method of putting the bars together is that I'm not actually going to affect the shape or size of any of the pieces. I'm just taking the bottom edge off, and I can keep everything lined up in the same direction as it was. It'll go together just fine. I also have fewer gluing surfaces that I have to address. I already have 4 gluing surfaces together that are good, solid, firm lines. Nothing to be concerned with on gaps. No tiny pieces to glue together. Takes a lot of the work out of it. It does have a little bit more waste to it, as we'll see once I get into it a little bit later, but those pieces could be used too if you really want to. The variations that I'm now able to do, I can take the pieces and stagger them by about 1/2 of a block. And if I cut this apart, I could either leave it as it is, or if I cut it apart, that would give me something that looks something like this. So it's kind of a checkerboard, but not quite. I could also set it up in the checkerboard pattern. And here I'd be cutting off, I have plenty of waste here on the outside edge, so I would cut it off essentially there, and another cut through the center, so I'll have 2 blocks of these, but it's just the pure checkerboard pattern. A third option, which is the one that I'm after today, is I'll be putting them at a 45-degree angle and getting that nice diamond pattern. I made this jig for gluing things up at a 45-degree angle. Basically, it's just a piece of plywood glued up to a piece that I've jointed. This is melamine. I do have the surface waxed, and this surface is also waxed to ensure that the glue doesn't stick as well, and especially these edges are also waxed down. The way the jig works is that as I lay the pieces in place, I'll bump them against this edge and against this 45-degree, and in theory, everything should line up perfectly as I go along. It's much easier than trying to do this any other way. Just glue them into place. You can see they are bumping out of place a little bit, and that may happen. The other part of the jig is this caul that has the angle on the other side to help squeeze things in place. So I can set the width of this by putting one piece on an end and then pulling it all in together. I'll be clamping this direction across the board to keep everything square and in line that way and keep everything tight. And as I bring this in, I can clamp this edge to the other edge, and the result is that I have no gaps. My angles are all aligned correctly, and the gluing process becomes much, much easier. I should be able to do anything all the way out to 3-foot length of board with this, which is much longer than any of my inlay strips normally would be. By lining up the bandsaw blade just outside the points, I can run the other edge along the fence, and because everything's lined up accordingly to this edge, I should be able to just cut off everything just outside of these points. That'll leave me triangles on this side of equal size, and I can use those later if I so choose. this block, I should be able to just run across on my joiner or take a plane across it. It'll be a little bit rough at first, but the surfaces are all snugly glued together. It's pretty solid. I do have end grain to end grain on the gluing surfaces. In the end though, I'm going to have a side grain here that I'll be gluing a side piece together on each side of the diamond. That'll help hold everything completely in place. So now I'm going to cut down the center between these. My main goal is to make sure that I'm to the side of this row of diamonds here. There we go. And I'll be left with just that little strip between. I'll cut this one as well. So this gives me two pieces of face grain inlay. I'll be cutting these off at about half the width of this basically for my cutting board or pizza peels. And you can see again that the colors of these two pieces are not quite the same. One piece of wood is darker than the other, so I want to make sure that this piece does not get put in with the rest of these. If I wanted to make this one into a longer piece, I could cut it into strips and join those end to end. Now the subtle difference between the two methods, this is the first method that has the gaps, is that the maple grain runs vertically along the whole strip of it. On these easier to do ones, the grain is at an angle, the same angle as the diamond. I don't see that as a big drawback necessarily. It's just a difference of style. Overall, the look is going to be the same, but it definitely is much easier to get a good tight fit and put everything together. For me, there's no question, method 2 is way easier than method 1. The advantages far outweigh the efficiency of wood. The glue up is a lot easier. There's a lot less sanding to be done of little bitty tiny pieces. My glue up is a lot straighter, cleaner, and no gaps, most important of all. I hope you've enjoyed this video on making the diamond pattern inlay using edge grain. If you do find it helpful, please like it and subscribe. It's going to help other people find this video a lot easier, and we appreciate your support. Thanks.